Scarborough Shoal does not appear on most maps of the South China Sea in any way that conveys what it actually is. On a chart, it is a small ring of notation, a horseshoe-shaped reef formation roughly 150 kilometers west of the Philippine island of Luzon, enclosing a lagoon approximately 130 square kilometers of shallow water. The shoal has no permanent landmass, no runway, no harbor. What it has, what makes it the subject of legal proceedings, diplomatic protests, and sustained maritime operations by the People's Republic of China, is position. Scarborough Shoal sits at the entrance to one of the most productive fishing grounds in the South China Sea, within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines as defined by UNCLOS, and directly athwart the transit routes that connect the Pacific Ocean to the South China Sea's western shipping lanes. In 2012, China took effective control of the shoal from the Philippines through a sustained Coast Guard and Maritime Militia presence that has not ended. The Philippines took the matter to an international tribunal under UNCLOS. In 2016, the tribunal ruled in Manila's favor in every substantive respect. China has not recognized the ruling. China has not changed its presence at the shoal. The water around Scarborough Shoal on a September morning has a quality that experienced mariners describe as heavy. 94 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface, 97% humidity, a tropical haze that reduces the visible horizon to something closer to a suggestion than a line. The South China Sea at this latitude in September is deep blue, almost purple, and the haze that sits above it is not the clean fog of northern waters, but a thick, warm opacity that makes the boundary between sea and sky difficult to locate at any distance. It smells like warm salt and diesel and the specific organic note of a working fishery. Fish holds, net chemicals, the biological residue of a sea that feeds millions of people across a dozen nations. At Scarborough Shoal, that smell is permanent. The fishing fleet is always there. The question for the Combat Information Center of a U.S. guided missile destroyer conducting a freedom of navigation operation in the vicinity of the shoal was always the same question. Which vessels in the fleet were fishing and which were working? At 7:04 a.m., the answer began to reveal itself. The surface search radar had been tracking the area around Scarborough Shoal since 6:15 a.m., a standard pre-approach sweep that cataloged the ambient vessel traffic before the destroyer's track brought it into the operational zone. At 6:15 a.m., the picture had shown 34 vessels in the immediate shoal vicinity, distributed in the loose, irregular pattern of an active fishing fleet. By 6:45 a.m., that number had increased to 51. By 7:04 a.m., it was 78, and the distribution had changed. The vessels were no longer irregular. They were forming a ring, not quickly, not obviously, not in the dramatic way that formation maneuvers appear when military vessels execute them. The consolidation was slow, organic looking, the kind of movement that could be described as tidal drift by anyone who wanted to describe it that way. But the CIC tactical officer had been watching the bearing tracks for 19 minutes, and the bearing tracks did not drift. They converged with the slow, patient, coordinated precision of people who had rehearsed this approach enough times that it no longer required active command and control. Just a shared understanding of the geometry and the patience to let it develop. Bridge, CIC. We have a developing formation around Scarborough Shoal. Approximately 78 contacts now distributed in a ring pattern, inner diameter approximately 3 nautical miles. Contacts are AIS active, all self-reporting as fishing vessels. Speed, most holding 3 to 4 knots. Course variations inconsistent with active fishing. They are maintaining position, not working. The captain was at the bridge window. He had been there since 6:50 a.m. Additional assets? Confirmed 3 CCG contacts at the outer edge of the formation ring. Range from us, 8.4 nautical miles. Classification, probable CCG Type 54 cutters. And 1 planned contact at bearing 287, range 22 nautical miles, Type 054A frigate. Holding position, not moving. The picture was complete. The architecture of what China's maritime doctrine called the cabbage strategy was visible on the CIC display in its full form, an innermost ring of fishing vessels, the Maritime Militia, the little blue men, whose AIS transponders said fishermen, but whose coordinated formation movement said something else, backed by a middle ring of China Coast Guard cutters with the legal framing of administrative authority, backed by a distant planned warship that said nothing and did nothing but was present at 22 nautical miles, saying everything its presence needed to say. 3 concentric rings of Chinese presence, each ring providing the one inside it with a layer of cover, each ring providing the one outside it with a layer of deniability. The combined replacement value of what was assembling on the radar display was not the point, but it was a number worth knowing. 78 fishing and militia vessels at an average replacement value of $2 million each represented a fleet investment of $156 million. 3 CCG. Type 54 cutters at approximately $180 million each added $540 million. The Type 054A frigate at 22 nautical miles was another $480 million. Total adversary presence value, $1.18 billion in floating assets organized around a reef formation the size of a mid-sized city park, positioned to prevent a single U.S. warship from completing a legal freedom of navigation transit through international waters that an international tribunal had already ruled did not belong to China. The freedom of navigation operation was not optional. It was the point. A FONOP that does not happen because the geometry of its opposition looks complicated is not a FONOP. It is a concession that the opposition was correct to make the geometry complicated. The captain understood this. He had understood it before he had left port. The question was not whether to proceed. The question was how. Current CPA to inner ring, he said. CPA to nearest fishing vessel contact. 4,200 yards and holding. We haven't entered the ring yet. At current speed, we'll be at ring boundary in approximately 11 minutes. 4,200 yards was comfortable. It was also temporary. At 7:09 a.m., Channel 16 activated. The transmission came from one of the CCG cutters, not the nearest one, but the lead cutter that had positioned itself at the closest point of the outer ring to the destroyer's track. The voice was calm, formal, accented, and patient. Warship approaching Scarborough Shoal. This is China Coast Guard vessel. You are approaching Chinese sovereign waters. Freedom of navigation operations in this area are not recognized under Chinese law. Alter course immediately. This is a final warning. The captain looked at his communication officer. The communication officer looked back. The claim of Chinese sovereignty over the waters around Scarborough Shoal had no standing in international law. The 2016 UNCLOS Tribunal had addressed this specifically and in detail. The Chinese government's position was that the tribunal lacked jurisdiction, and the ruling was null. Neither position affected the legal status of the water the destroyer was transiting. The water was international. The transit was legal. The CCG broadcast was theater. Theater with a radio record, theater designed to be cited later, theater whose audience was not the bridge of a U.S. destroyer, but the domestic Chinese media and the diplomatic channels, where a recording of a U.S. ship receiving a warning and proceeding anyway would be presented as American aggression in Chinese waters. A log it, no response. The CCG broadcast repeated verbatim a second time, then a third. The patient, rhythmic repetition of a recorded message that existed to be recorded itself. A loop of legal framing that filled the maritime frequencies around Scarborough Shoal with the sound of Chinese administrative authority being asserted over water that international law said it did not own. The crew learned to hear it the way experienced sailors learned to hear certain navigation buoy signals, constant, present, noted, and not relevant to the decision being made. At 7:14 a.m., the inner ring began to move, not all 78 vessels. The ring did not close in a single coordinated maneuver that would have been unmistakably military. Instead, approximately 20 of the innermost vessels began drifting northward along bearings that would, over the next several minutes, place them directly on the destroyer's projected track, not at speed, 4 to 5 knots, the pace of vessels that could be described as simply maintaining position in a current. But the current did not account for the bearing mathematics. The CIC was tracking all 20 contacts, and their bearing tracks were not random. They were converging on a single point in approximately 9 minutes, the point in space where the destroyer would be at the rate it was closing the ring. CPA revised, 2,800 yards. Inner ring movement detected on destroyer track, 2,800 yards. Below the 3-mile threshold, where this transit required active decision-making, the burst friction arrived at 7:17 a.m. from the communications system. The destroyer's link to 7th Fleet Command in Yokosuka had been operating on a standard encrypted circuit since departure. At 7:17 a.m., during the transmission of a routine situation update, the satellite communication system's encryption module entered its scheduled key cycling interval, a 45-second process during which the outgoing circuit was unavailable. Standard procedure, routine, except that the situation update being transmitted at the moment of the cycle was the one that would have told 7th Fleet Command that the inner ring had begun its approach movement. The update queued. The circuit would resume in 45 seconds. In those 45 seconds, the CPA revised twice. CPA 2,100 yards. The 20 vessels that had begun moving were now close enough that the bridge could see the larger ones without binoculars. White and blue hulls, the fishing vessel livery of the South China Sea, moving at the unhurried pace of boats that had all day and no particular urgency and nothing specific to answer for because they were, according to their AIS transponders and the Chinese government, fishing vessels in Chinese waters going about their lawful business. At 2,100 yards, the crew could see the individual people on the nearest vessel's decks, men in working clothes, some holding what appeared to be fishing equipment, some not holding anything, standing at the rail, watching the destroyer approach. At this range, in the morning haze, the line between a fishing vessel and a militia vessel was visible only if you knew the signs, and the signs were subtle. The way the boats held position relative to each other without the variability of active fishing, the uniformity of their drift rate, the way the people at the rails were watching with the stillness of people who had been told to be there, rather than the engagement of people who had arrived there by curiosity. The captain knew the signs. Seahawk to cockpit, the helicopter crew moved to the aircraft. From the CCG Cutter's bridge at 4.1 nautical miles, from the Type 054A frigate's CIC at 22 nautical miles, from whatever surveillance satellite was passing overhead on its orbital track, all of them registered the same information. The U.S. destroyer's helicopter crew was in their cockpit. The CCG broadcast on Channel 16 continued, unchanged, uninterrupted. The same words, the same measured tone, the same claim, repeated for the 14th time. In the background of the bridge, it had become part of the ambient noise, the ventilation hum, and the electronic equipment, and the distant sound of the sea against the hull, and the patient voice of a Coast Guard vessel asserting sovereignty over international water. CPA 1,600 yards. The nearest militia vessels were clearly visible now, their motion deliberate, their positions in the developing obstacle field calculated. The radar picture in the CIC showed what the bridge windows could not fully convey. The scale. Not 20 vessels on the track, not 40. The full ring, all 78 contacts, was tightening. The outer vessels were maintaining station, while the inner vessels advanced. The CCG cutters had moved from the outer edge toward the middle layer. The Type 054A frigate at 22 nautical miles had not moved. It did not need to. It was the backstop, the statement that said if the layers in front of it were somehow insufficient, the next layer existed. At 7:23 a.m., the second friction arrived from the sea itself. The September South China Sea is not a calm water. The swell that morning was running from the northeast at 2 to 3 feet. Moderate, manageable, but present in a way that mattered when 78 vessels and a guided missile destroyer were all navigating in close proximity. The swell period was 7 seconds, which produced a synchronization effect on vessels of similar size. The militia fishing vessels, averaging 80 to 100 feet in length, were rolling in the same 7-second rhythm. This made their courses appear slightly more erratic on radar than their actual tracks, small rolls producing slight bearing deviations that the CIC's tracking system had to distinguish from genuine course changes. 3 times in the preceding 4 minutes, the system had flagged a militia vessel as altering course toward the destroyer, requiring the tactical officer to evaluate whether the deviation was a roll artifact or an intentional movement before advising the captain. 3 false evaluations in 4 minutes. Not a crisis, but a cognitive load on the crew that was not free. CPA 1,200 yards. Below 1,000 yards was the line where the coal regs no longer provided comfortable theoretical separation between the concept of close quarters and the concept of imminent collision. At 1,200 yards, with 78 contacts distributed across a ring that was tightening on the destroyer's track, the tactical picture was the most complex it had been since contact. The radar display looked like a city. Finding the individual contacts that represented genuine approach vectors against the background of the full militia formation required the same cognitive filter that separates signal from noise. And noise in this picture was abundant. The captain made his first escalation. Seahawk, engines start. The turbines ran up on the flight deck. At 1,200 yards, the nearest militia vessels were close enough that their crews could hear the engine sound carry across the water on the morning humidity. At 4.1 nautical miles, the CCG Cutter's bridge team registered the thermal signature on their FLIR. At 22 nautical miles, the Type 054A frigate's electronic systems logged the acoustic and thermal activity. The information moved outward through the rings in the time it took the sound to travel, and the response, whatever it was, would travel inward at the speed of decisions. CPA 980 yards below 1,000. The number that meant the tactical space available for any maneuver had become measured not in comfort, but in seconds. At 7:28 a.m., something changed on the CIC display. The 20 vessels that had been on the approach track, the innermost element of the ring that had drifted north to position themselves on the destroyer's course, stopped advancing. Their speed had not dropped to zero. They were still making 3 to 4 knots, but their bearing tracks had shifted. Instead of converging on the destroyer's projected position, they were beginning to fan slightly. The innermost vessels holding the vessels immediately behind them, spreading laterally as if the leading edge of the formation had encountered something it had not expected. The tactical officer studied his display for 4 seconds. Then, inner ring, bearing drift, lead contacts, apparent fanning movement. CPA appears to be stabilizing, not confirmed, not conclusive. A trend on a radar display that could represent a decision or could represent a correction for the 7-second swell period. The captain registered it. He said nothing. He waited. CPA 940 yards. Holding. The number had not increased, but it had stopped decreasing. The destroyer was at 940 yards from the nearest militia vessel inside the ring. The CCG broadcasts still cycling on Channel 16. The Seahawk engines running on the flight deck. The PLAN frigate at 22 nautical miles, noting everything. And the inner ring of militia vessels had stopped advancing. The captain made his second escalation, launched the Seahawk, establish orbit over the inner ring formation, FLIR on all CCG contacts. The helicopter lifted at 7:29 a.m. and banked north-northwest, climbing to 400 feet and establishing an orbit that placed it directly above the gap between the inner militia ring and the approaching CCG cutters. The Seahawk's FLIR swept across the surface below. Fishing vessels, militia vessels, the white hulls of the CCG cutters moving to the middle layer, the geometric precision of the ring visible from altitude in a way that was not visible from the surface. The helicopter crew was seeing but the shore-based surveillance assets, the satellite overhead, and the CCG commanders already knew the formation from above. They were seeing the architecture. CPA 940 yards. Stable. Inner ring lead contacts. Further fanning. Opening to port and starboard. The militia formation was parting. Not because anyone had told it to, because the geometry of maintaining a blocking position against a destroyer that had not stopped, had not altered course, had not acknowledged the CCG broadcasts, and had now placed a helicopter directly above the formation, made the blocking position untenable in a way that pure persistence could not overcome. The militia vessels were fishing boats. They were crewed by military reservists with military training, but they were in fishing boats, fiberglass and steel hulls, designed for the sea, not for the specific scenario of holding position in front of a 9,200-ton guided missile destroyer that was holding course and had just added a helicopter to the geometry. No militia captain had been given authorization to actually collide with the destroyer. That was not the mission. The mission was presence, obstruction, the appearance of Chinese administrative authority being exercised over Chinese sovereign waters. A collision produced none of those things. A collision produced an international incident. Environmental contamination in a major fishery, personal legal exposure for the captain of the vessel that struck a U.S. warship, and footage that could not be edited into anything other than what it was. The inner ring parted, not quickly, not dramatically, slowly, with the unhurried pace of boats drifting in a current, the same pace at which they had arrived. The corridor through the militia formation opened at 7:32 a.m., a gap of approximately 400 yards centered on the destroyer's track, widening as the destroyer continued north at 12 knots. The helmsman held course. The bearing had been steady for 47 minutes. At 7:34 a.m., the nearest CCG cutter made its move, having held position in the middle ring while the militia formation attempted its obstruction. The lead CCG cutter accelerated to 16 knots and altered course to 015 degrees, a course that would place it directly on the destroyer's port beam at approximately 600 yards, matching course and speed in the shoulder configuration, not the militia's passive obstruction, the Coast Guard's active shoulder, the sustained proximity maneuver that said, if the inner ring won't stop you, the administrative authority will follow you. New CPA, CCG cutter, port beam, 580 yards, speed now 18 knots, closing. The CCG broadcast changed at 7:35 a.m. After 43 repetitions of the same recorded warning, the voice shifted. Live, not recorded. Formal, but with an edge that the recorded voice had lacked. U.S. warship, your continued presence is a provocation against Chinese sovereignty. China Coast Guard is maintaining escort. You will be accompanied until you leave Chinese waters. This is a final advisory, an escort declaration. The CCG was reframing the encounter. The destroyer was not transiting international waters under UNCLOS. It was operating illegally in Chinese waters, and the CCG was providing a law enforcement escort. The legal substance was unchanged. The water was still international. The transit was still legal. The tribunal ruling had not expired. but the framing had shifted. The record of this encounter, in the version Beijing would produce, would show a U.S. warship refusing Chinese administrative direction and being tracked by Chinese law enforcement until it departed. CPACCG, 520 yards and closing. The captain made his third escalation. CIWS to passive thermal track. Port contact. The close-in weapons system rotated. The barrel assembly oriented toward the CCG cutter at 520 yards. Passive thermal tracking. Not an engagement posture, not a weapons-ready configuration, but a specific observable orientation of the system that every CCG captain in the South China Sea knew the name of. The rotation was visible to the naked eye from the CCG bridge at 520 yards. The thermal imaging of the CCG vessel's surveillance system registered it. It was added to whatever record was being made. Seahawk repositioned, CCG cutter bearing, 300 feet altitude, flare lock. The helicopter descended to 300 feet and established a track directly over the CCG cutter's bow. Not obstructing, not threatening, but present. Its rotor wash reached the surface of the sea between the two ships. At 300 feet above a ship making 18 knots, the helicopter's downwash created a visible disturbance in the water between the two hulls. A churning strip of white foam and surface disruption that marked, in physical terms, the space the two ships were sharing. CPACCG, 490 yards. Holding. 490 yards. The CCG cutter had matched the destroyer's course and speed. The shoulder was established. The escort was established in Chinese framing. In UNCLOS framing, a Coast Guard vessel was following a warship in transit through international waters and making claims of sovereignty with no legal foundation. For 12 more minutes, the geometry held. The destroyer north at 12 knots, the CCG cutter at 490 yards on the port beam, the Seahawk between them at 300 feet, the CIWS in passive track, the Militia ring now dispersed to the south and reforming behind the encounter rather than ahead of it. The planned frigate at 22 nautical miles, still not moving, still watching, still saying everything its presence needed to say. At 7:47 a.m., the CCG cutter reduced speed by 2 knots. It was 490 yards to port, matching course, and then it was 490 yards to port, making 2 knots less. The separation between the vessels began to open, not dramatically, not in a way that the CCG broadcast acknowledged. The broadcast was still running. The claim of Chinese waters was still being asserted on Channel 16, but the ship making the assertion was falling behind. The tactical officer's voice was measured. CCG contact. Speed now 14 knots, bearing opening to port. CPACCG 520 yards. 560, 600. The destroyer was past the inner ring, past the CCG shoulder. The planned frigate at 22 nautical miles remained stationary. Then at 7:52 a.m. began a slow turn to the southwest, back toward the Spratly chain, away from the track. The backstop was recalling itself. At 7:58 a.m., the freedom of navigation operation through the Scarborough Shoal vicinity was complete. No one on the bridge made a comment. The helmsman held course until the watch rotation at 8 a.m. when the standard relief occurred and the next helmsman took the wheel for a sea that was for the first time in 54 minutes. Genuinely unremarkable. The new helmsman felt the difference in the bridge atmosphere, the way sailors feel the difference between general quarters and stand down. Something in the air, something in the way people were holding their bodies. The previous helmsman went below. His hands, which had not moved from course for 54 minutes, while 78 vessels maneuvered around the ship and a CCG cutter sat 490 yards off the port beam, had developed a stiffness across the knuckles that would not go away until the following morning. He would not describe it to anyone. He had held the course. The course was the job. Fleet Command received the situation report at 8:15 a.m. 2 paragraphs. No adjectives. The report described 78 militia vessels, 3 CCG cutters, 1 PLAN frigate at backstop distance, CCG shoulder maneuver at 490 yards, non-kinetic escalation ladder executed in sequence, transit completed on assigned track without course deviation, 78 militia vessels, 3 CCG cutters, 1 planned frigate at 22 nautical miles, 54 minutes from first contact to transit completion, 490 yards, closest to approach, 0 degrees of course deviation, 0 acknowledgement of Chinese sovereignty, claims, 0 inches, yielded. The South China Sea returned to its usual configuration, contested, monitored, and crossed by ships whose right to cross it does not require anyone's permission. The cabbage strategy requires the other ship to stop or turn or acknowledge the ring in a way that validates its existence. It had found a ship that did none of those things. Geometry built on patience can be met by patience that holds still. That is not a doctrine. It is simpler and more durable. A crew that had already decided before 78 vessels appeared on the radar that 78 vessels would not be the reason the wheel moved.